Okay, let's move on to our main presentation with Alison Henry. So Alison Henry is a collection strategies librarian at the University of Alberta and a member of the library's research impact team. She holds a bachelor's degree in chemical engineering from Queen's University and an MLIS from the University of Alberta. Her professional interests include research impact analysis and collection assessment. When not at work, she prefers to be outdoors, paddling, skiing, hiking, cycling, or just reading in a backyard hammock. She will give her presentation in English. If you have questions, je devrais dire en français aussi, donc si vous avez des questions en français, n'hésitez pas de les poser en français aussi. Alison parle un peu le français qu'elle m'a dit, sinon ben, je vais aider pour la traduction aussi. During her talk, she had put in some time for questions, so after different sections, so maybe wait until then if you have questions, or post them in the chat and we'll try to figure that out, how to get to those questions as we go along. So Alison, to you.
Okay. Thank you very much, Christine. As she has said, j'ai préparé cette conférence en anglais, mais je vous invite à poser vos questions dans la langue de votre choix. Je ferai de mon possible de répondre soit en français, soit en anglais. Et merci à Christine pour la traduction si ça devient nécessaire. And let's see if the screen sharing will work on my end. Okay. Can everyone see my slides? Okay, excellent. It's not clear from the way the screen is arranged here, but I'll try to get things a bit organized on this end. I will have to say, when I first volunteered to present on this topic, I was not really expecting such a large group. So this is a fairly informally structured presentation. Before I get into it, I guess I will join in the land acknowledgements and let you all know that I'm presenting from Treaty 6 territory, which has been a gathering place for Cree, Blackfoot, Métis, Nakota Sioux, Iroquois, Dene, Ojibwe, Saulteaux, Anishinaabe, Inuit, and many other peoples on this land. The plan for today is to give you a little bit of information about the project background. I am talking about a specific project for which we used VOSviewer. And then the three different parts of this project, then author collaboration network, some keyword analysis, and an attempt to do some comparisons on global research in some strategic research areas with keyword comparison visualizations. So my plan is to pause for questions at the end of each section, basically, so that we're not jumping too far back necessarily in addressing someone's question. Before I dive into it, I would like to know how well you know VOSviewer. So avoiding any potential outside polling difficulties, could you just use the raise hand feature to let me know if you have used VOSviewer before to create a network map of authors, keywords, or publications? Okay, I'm seeing quite a few hands raised. So not totally new to everybody. That's good. And then second question, the piece of this that was new to me, or I did something different from what I had done before, was in modifying a network created in VOSviewer to add additional scoring attributes to be able to visualize something other than the default options. So can you please raise your hand if you have done the same, if you've used it to visualize something other than the defaults? Okay. So it seems like maybe that part will be new to more people than the general use of the tool itself. Good. I'm glad that I hope it will be useful to you. So a little background on this project. I definitely like to give credit to colleagues when their work has been an inspiration. And part of this project was based on work by Jay McAllister and his colleagues. They had used VOSviewer to look at publication trends from their Faculty of Engineering over a 20-year period. And this project is a little bit different in that it involves much shorter timeframes. But our Faculty of Engineering was going through a strategic priority setting process. And as part of this, they had identified some key research areas where they felt either the faculty was already particularly strong or where they wanted to encourage additional work. And what they were hoping to see with some of this mapping is, first of all, a little information about collaborative relationships, both within the faculty, with other researchers within the university, and also with researchers outside the institution altogether. And then they wanted to take a look at perhaps how their current research output aligns with those stated priority areas. And then the last piece they were trying to examine is the way in which their research in certain topics maybe compares to the global work that is happening in this field. So the hope was that we could generate some comparison maps and say, people who are working on biomanufacturing, this is what it looks like. And then we could compare our output and I see if there are any gaps. Are there places maybe where we should be hiring for additional expertise to cover parts of this research area that we don't currently have well covered? Because luckily, they were finally, after a hiring freeze for a few years at our university, they were in the position to be hiring and wanted to potentially target some of those positions to align with these strategic areas. So that's a bit of the background of what we were trying to do. The first step, of course, was determining what data source would be most appropriate for this project. So in thinking about this, we searched a few different databases to try to identify Faculty of Engineering publications. Originally, 2017 to 2021 was the timeframe we were looking for. We did find the highest number of results in Scopus, followed very closely by Web of Science and then less closely by Compendex. However, the data structure in the Web of Science export made it easier for us to handle the author affiliation identification piece. And since the gap in number of results was not very large, Web of Science was preferred for this analysis. And VOSviewer can accept a variety of different file types. They are set up to accept information directly from a few different sources of a few different places we typically get our bibliometric information, but it can also accept files just in RIS format. So you're not necessarily limited to only those tools, the tools it's designed to use. If you don't have a subscription to those tools, you could still gather information another way and use an RIS export to be able to import it into VOSviewer as well. Okay, so the first piece is this author collaboration network. So some of the choices that we made, I'm trying to balance, I guess, the general principles at use here and some of the technical decisions that were made in creating these maps in hopes that the slides will maybe be useful to somebody else down the road. In our case, we chose to ignore documents with a large number of authors. We excluded any articles that had more than 25 authors. In our case, this meant excluding 14 papers. And I shared these with my colleagues in the Faculty of Engineering who had instigated this work, and they did not feel that those particular papers represented we weren't missing an entire research area by doing that. This would obviously be different depending on the field you're analyzing. So keep those choices in mind, I guess, as you go through. We also set the minimum number of papers at 10. And this brought us from a possibility of looking at over 14,000 authors down to 568, which felt like a much more manageable number. For reference, there are a little over 200 faculty members in our Faculty of Engineering. So this did mean that we were likely including both current faculty members and external authors, which is what we were hoping to see. The other issue with the 10 paper cutoff, though, is it does mean we're likely not capturing any new hires because they would not have had time to publish that many papers under this particular affiliation. So if that is a concern for you, that's something to keep in mind in how you set these choices if you're doing a similar analysis. We decided to keep all of the authors, even those who were isolated by themselves and not connected with the other authors, because that's part of what we wanted to see in doing this, right? Seeing what those networks looked like. For reference, the largest set of connected items was 557 authors. We kept the default choice for the normalization method. Now, I'm sure you have all encountered instances of issues with author disambiguation, and that authors are not necessarily consistent in publishing under the same form of their name every single time. So one of the pieces that was important in doing this analysis was creating an author thesaurus, basically. And this can be done by first going through the VOSviewer steps to create the network. And they will bring you a select authors window, which you can export. And then you can use that exported file to create your thesaurus file, deleting any extra columns and keeping a sort of an author column and a replace by column. This is pretty straightforward to do in any kind of spreadsheet software you like to use. And once you have the designated version of the name that you're going to keep, you can delete any of the extra rows. You only need rows for the ones that require a replace by term. And then you can go back in and sort of recreate your map with the thesaurus this time to clean up that authorship. So in our case, this is the initial map that we came up with. The colors right now are set to different clusters, co-authorship clusters. And you can see some of these outliers that I mentioned hanging around the outside. So this was interesting for our faculty colleagues to look at and to maybe see some connections that they hadn't expected. But what we also wanted to do with this network is, as I mentioned, identify the Faculty of Engineering authors, the other University of Alberta authors, and the external collaborators. And I'm just going to see if it lets me switch my screen sharing here. Okay. Okay, can you see the map now?
Yeah, we see the map in the browser.
In a browser. Okay,
yeah.
perfect.
And we see that it kind of highlights sometimes.
Yes,
as
okay.
you go over.
It does highlight, so you can zoom in on particular clusters. This is a feature that I had not used prior to this particular project, the ability to have these online versions of the maps, but it did make it very easy to share some of the results with people, especially as we went along and we're maybe still making some of the decisions about what was appropriate to include. And also, similar to within VOSviewer itself, you have options to change how you are viewing. So in this case, you can see right now the color is currently set by cluster. And this is the piece that we added. We added the default options for some of these overlay views are by publication year, or number of citations. You can have the colors change based on the more highly cited or less highly cited items. In our case, we added a very basic scoring for affiliation. So we set 0 as the Faculty of Engineering authors, and we set 0.5 to be in the middle of this color scale here, to be the other University of Alberta authors outside of the faculty. And we set 1 as the color for the external authors, so that they would show up in yellow on this map. And it is a little bit interesting to me, the authors, the ways in which the yellow authors show up, because remember, we had set a minimum number of papers to 10. And so that means anybody external who is showing up here is collaborating a fairly significant amount with Faculty of Engineering authors, because we were only searching for Faculty of Engineering publications. And yet we do still have some who are off here where their connection to the faculty is not obvious necessarily on this map, which surprised me for sure. This allowed our faculty colleagues to take a look at some of these collaboration patterns, and also to identify maybe certain areas of the university that are most highly collaborative with engineering as well. So of course that requires knowing who the various people are when they highlight, and I assume most of you won't, so we won't spend too much time on that. Now, if okay, I've gone back to the slideshow. Is that what shows up for you guys as well? Okay, just making sure. Excellent. Okay, this slide just talks a little bit about how to do that affiliation scoring, which is done after the initial map is created, and we have a map we're happy with. You we exported both the network and map files from VOSviewer, and use the Eric, that is a good question. I will get to that in just a minute, I think, or at least what I think is happening there. So yes, okay. So a little bit of information for people who haven't done this kind of scoring change before. VOSviewer allows you to export the maps you've created in a few different formats. And one of them is a 2-file format where you have both a network file and a map file. And you can work with this map file to add a new column, basically. If you open it in a spreadsheet, you will see that it has columns for those default overlay view options that I pointed out, the average publication year, average citations. You can just add your own column. In this case, we added affiliation. You can score it in whatever way is you deem appropriate to view what you want to view. So in our case, we went with a 0, 0.5, and 1 affiliation. And then save the file again. And then open the map again in VOSviewer using that same unchanged network file that had originally been exported and the edited map file to be able to view that. And then I've already shown this in the live view. So yes, what questions do you have? And my thing, yes, I don't know if there are.
I have one. Well,
okay, yeah.
I have one while people also get get comfortable, I guess. So you selected author with 10 or more publication. For the ones that have less than 10, could you go like piece by piece? Because you said the newer author from your organization wouldn't be picked up with that, but could you say, okay, 10 and more, but I also want these 3 people who are from University of Alberta, but don't have 10 yet. Like,
I think if you were going to do that, you would have to do it in a slightly different way. I'm not necessarily, but when there is a select authors screen that appears as part of this process. So I think what you would probably need to do if you wanted to do that would be to set your minimum number of papers lower so that it initially is capturing a much larger share of authors. And then you would have to exclude the ones you don't want, and in order to make sure that you're keeping. I haven't tried this, but this is my expectation of.
Yeah, it makes sense.
How
but
I
with
think
14,000, then
yeah, you'd want to try to aim for somewhere.
Wouldn't want to go through all of those. Oh yeah, I want to keep those. Yeah. Okay.
Yeah.
Thank you.
It's possible. Perhaps somebody else who's more expert with VOSviewer might have a better answer to that question. I'm not sure.
We have a question for Erica and Robert. So Erica first.
I do also want to get the ones that are in the chat if possible. So maybe we can do a balance here, but Erica, go ahead.
Sure, thank you, Alison. Can you pull up the visualization again, maybe on the online version? So as you mentioned, it's quite hard to really read anything going on here. I've never used VOSviewer, so I'm wondering that's part of the solution. To what extent can you move any of the nodes so that you can really see what is being connected and what isn't?
So when you hover over a node, you can, as I'm doing here, you can see it sort of fades out the background and just shows the connections for that node. So you can go through them in this way. There is also this find option where if you want to look at a particular author, I'm going to pick on maybe former department chair Canadienne and just see his connections. You can do that through this list as well. So depending on how well you know what it is you're mapping, I guess some of these different features become a bit more important.
And if you wanted to, could you get the number of collaborations onto those lines so that you knew how many collaborations are occurring between these people?
Oh, yes. So there are different options as you're building the map to adjust that sort of for that connection strength and like the spacing of how far apart things are. You can also change how this, like right now, the size of each of these bubbles is set to the number of publications. So you can see it's our most prolific authors who have the largest nodes here, but you can change that as well. You can change it to sort of the link strength. You can change it to be the number of links, which, as you can see, balances things out a little bit more than the document version does. If I zoom in there. So there are several different, once it's created, there are several different things you can look at or that you can adjust as well to sort of, to examine different aspects of this collaboration.
Wonderful. Thank you so much, Alison.
You're welcome.
So maybe the question from Robert, and then we'll have, I think we have kind of one real question from the chat. There's some exchange, which is very good as well.
Hi, Alison. This is a really neat presentation. We do kind of similar analyses at UHN, and it's really neat to see that other people are doing the same. I just want to, first of all, answer or maybe have input on the question that was asked earlier, if you just wanted a few people that didn't make the threshold. So as you said, I would recommend running it with no threshold for number of papers. Hope your computer doesn't light on fire or explode. And then you can use the thesaurus to remove all the people who you don't want that are under the threshold, and then rerun the analysis. And that we've done stuff like that before, and it seems to work well. Again, when your computer doesn't light on fire.
Right. Yes.
The question I want to ask was, with your map here, did you try playing with the attraction or repulsion numbers to try to get more like visual clustering? Because right now we run into this similar issue with you when we have large data sets and it just turns into a giant cluster itself that it, like, visually it's hard to see. So sometimes quite often we play around with the attraction repulsion numbers, and that's when it turns from a science into more of an art to try to see.
Well, and I think that is it. So I did do a little bit of that on my own. I wish there would have been more opportunity to do that sort of as a team with the people in the faculty, because they're the ones who are ultimately using this. And so they're the ones who can determine, you know, what best helps them see what they want to see from this. But unfortunately, the time constraints involved here didn't really allow for as much of that discussion as I would have liked. But I'm glad that you pointed that out as an option for people to keep in mind. The VOSviewer makes it very easy to try different things, right? To make a bunch of different adjustments and see what that looks like. And then, you know, revert all those changes if you don't like, revert back to a different version if it's not helpful. So I definitely encourage people to play around in it.
So maybe a last question for this section from the chat, which is more on the general side of thing, like the other question were more technical, but from Birgid, sorry, what new insights did this analysis provide for the researchers? So what's kind of the use of overlaying this color or whatever?
Yes, okay, that is a very good question. And I do want to try to sort of address more at the end of the presentation altogether what we learned from this. But I think from the author piece, when I did first show these maps to the engineering professors who had sort of requested this work, I think that there were some things that were not at all a surprise to them in terms of, well, some of those effects of the size of the bubble linked to the number of publications, but I think they were a little bit surprised at some authors who had a lot more ties that maybe they weren't generally aware of, and some of the people who were more outliers. I think some of those things were surprises. And as I say, some of the decision making about what to include really affects that. As Eric's question about the external outliers, that they have written enough papers with Faculty of Engineering people to show up in this analysis, but not enough maybe with the same, or like with the same co-author. So their co-author is obviously not here because they are not linked in. It could also, I will say, another possibility with those external outliers is that they have been misclassified. We did go through and sort of automatically classify some of the authors, and then some of them I ended up having to do kind of by hand. And because many of these authors have published with multiple affiliations. And so my general rule in doing this assignment was if they had a University of Alberta address, then I counted them as a University of Alberta person. It's possible that this person was perhaps, a grad student at the University of Alberta in the past, and I missed noticing a paper with that affiliation, and then they have since moved on, but are still co-authoring with UAlberta people. It's, I think there are many different possible explanations that could be both related to actual facts of their publication or perhaps to user error in how the data was coded there. But yes, so they didn't meet the minimum requirements to establish that edge, which may or may not be. This. Okay, let's move on to talk about some of this keyword analysis. Oh, I see people want to talk more about the author cleanup. Let's make sure we do have time for the 3 different parts of this project, and then maybe at the end, if there are still questions about the author piece, then I will come back to that. Does that make sense? Okay. So our initial keyword analysis. So this was based on the author's keywords, not on a controlled vocabulary. It's important to note that up front. In this case, we used a minimum number of occurrences of 10, which meant we had 304 keywords to view, instead of originally 23,757 author supplied keywords associated with all of the articles included in our data set. In this case, we did not keep the isolated keywords, and we ended up with 11 clusters of keywords. Now, with the keyword analysis, as with the authors, a thesaurus becomes quite important. Oh, yes, I guess I will get to that part. Yes, the thesaurus becomes quite important. As you can imagine, the list of keywords contained both singular and plural versions of terms. It contained both acronyms and terms fully spelled out, or sometimes both. So there were a lot of those things that were very obvious and easy for me to clean up. But I will also point out that it is important to be careful not to combine too many things and not to be creating kind of false equivalences in these keywords. I do have a background in chemical engineering, and I worked in the chemical industry before I became a librarian. So I have a certain level of subject matter expertise for working with this particular faculty, but not extensive enough. So involving people with that subject matter expertise can potentially become important for your thesaurus for figuring out when 2 concepts really do need to stay separate, as 2 separate concepts, and when they can be safely combined. Yeah, as I said, it's easy to do the plural singular ones and the acronym versus fully spelled out terms most of the time. But some of the other part can be a little trickier and might work better if you have a collaborator. So I will again go to the online version of this map. And is it showing, or do I have to? Okay.
No, we see it.
Perfect. Okay. So in our case, we ended up with 11 different clusters here. And you can see some of them, I guess, have more links to the other colors. And some of them are very strongly more kind of within themselves, I guess, depending on some of these keywords. And you can see that this one has quite a different shape, I guess, compared to our author cluster or our author map, which was interesting to look at. I think for the faculty, it was perhaps a bit surprising to them. I don't know if there were any connections here that were particularly surprising to them. But I do think that some of the different terminology used, or they expected certain things perhaps to be more closely linked together than they end up being when mapped in this way. Let's see. Yeah. But I think the purpose in generating this map was also partly to facilitate the comparisons that I'm going to talk about next. So I don't really have as much to say about this this individual map necessarily. Let's go. Yes. So are there questions about the keyword.
So
Map
there is
generation.
one question in the chat from Justin. So do you know, like, how does it work in the back end basically? So how is the clustering done? Is it modularity, latent, other types of algorithm, or can we change the way, I guess? Maybe that's going a bit further than the question, but can we change the way the clustering is done?
Yes, I believe, let me see, did I specify in the slide, or would I have to go back to my other note? I believe there are multiple algorithms that you can choose from, but I don't have VOSviewer open at the moment to verify that. So maybe somebody who has more experience with it can chime in about it. But again, as with the other, as with the author analysis, you can still modify things like the link strength and the attraction and repulsion and all of that for all of the mapping, all of these network maps. To look at them a little bit different ways.
And that's all the question I see so far. I'm sorry if I missed something.
That's okay. We will still have time for questions at the end.
Or,
absolutely.
Oh, raise your hand or turn on your microphone if I missed you in the chat. I'm sorry.
Yes. So, actually, yes, we'll do slides first. So the third thing that we wanted to do was take a look. So as part of their strategic priorities and planning process, the faculty had identified some particular research areas, 7 different research areas that they either consider themselves strong in or particularly want to be focusing on at this time. And what they wanted to do was try to get a sense of the work being done globally in these research areas and compare it to the work they are doing in the faculty in those research areas. So what I tried to do for them is generate these comparator data sets. So I looked at each of those subject areas and did a bunch of searching to try to hit on the right combination of terms that described the research area as the faculty saw it. So I didn't rely on any existing, like this was Web of Science data, so I didn't use any of the sort of defined Web of Science categories or anything like that, or the different any of the sort of vendor provided classification. We just did this with keyword searching, which may or may not be the best approach to take if somebody is undertaking a similar analysis, but this is what we tried to do. So we tried to build a set of papers that represented each of these research areas, and we limited it to a 2-year time frame because the goal, as much as possible, given the lags in publication times, we wanted it to be quite current for what is going on in these fields right now. And the hope was that by capturing these papers, we could see sort of what additional keywords or what additional concepts are involved in research in each of these areas that we may or may not be addressing in the work being done here at the University of Alberta. So we were looking for first, and then so with these, I ended up with 8 different data sets, basically, or well, 7 data sets and the combined data set of papers to address biomanufacturing, net zero and energy transition, artificial intelligence and autonomous systems, agriculture, indigenous initiatives and EDI, energy systems, and advanced manufacturing. Initially, we attempted to combine all of these keywords and set the threshold at that same minimum of 10 papers that we had used previously, which led to too many, I would say, too many keywords and staying in our set here. So this is what the map looked like originally with those 1,000 keywords. Now, obviously, some of these topics have a lot more publications than others. I don't know if I noted it on the slides or not. No, I don't think so. But the sets ranged from, I think we had 20,426 papers on that energy systems topic. You can kind of see there's a lot of energy showing up on this map. And we only had 692 papers in that biomanufacturing cluster. So it was really not as many publications. And we tried to strike a balance between being broad enough to really see maybe differences between global output and our local output, but also focused enough that we didn't end up with too many results to reasonably map and too many results to make the visualization useful. So as mentioned previously, it can be, sometimes maybe a bit more art than science in some of this decision making here, though I tried to keep careful track of how it was done. So this is the second version of the same map. In this case, we only kept items that had 40 occurrences of the terms. And this one was preferred by my Faculty of Engineering colleagues for viewing sort of globally the areas in that they consider to be priorities. But also we decided it would be more useful to do individual maps for each of these subject areas. So that is what happened next. We made maps again. I'm just going to go kind of quickly through them so you can see the differences. Biomanufacturing was the one with the fewest papers. And you can see it is a much sparser map than some of the others that we're going to come across. Whereas the maps related to energy transition, some of these look quite different, and you can really see that there are linkages almost between like a concept that might have seemed entirely separate, like that would not have been a term that we were searching in trying to identify these papers, but that was obviously an important part of work going on and in this area. The artificial intelligence machine one is fascinating to me because of just looking at it, this large number of papers with this term, with links out to all kinds of different concepts in some cases, entirely separate fields. Well, obviously not entirely separate. Obviously there are linkages, but things that on our campus would be in another faculty altogether, for example, which is, I guess, what we expect of a topic like this today. And our agriculture topic, this was related to precision agriculture, and certainly remote sensing is a big piece of what our faculty are interested in this area. So it's good to see that reflected in the map here. And our Indigenous knowledge and EDI. Now, this is probably a situation where we are conflating things that aren't necessarily as linked in the literature as they are sort of on our campus, I guess. But yeah. So I'm just going through these very quickly. The slides can be shared, and there are links to all of these maps. There are links in all of the slides. So I think I'd just sort of like to move on to wrapping up and then have time to discuss amongst ourselves and deal with any additional questions people have. What did we learn from doing this? So these analyses were included in a report with some more traditional numbers that we would be more in the habit the research impact team of providing with our reports. For example, we looked at the same set of papers in Insights in order to pull out some of the international collaboration and show that actually on a world map, not in a network. So this was really used as a supplement, I would say, to some of those kinds of some of those tools that we are more in the habit of using. And I would say that it did help us get a more complete picture of the Faculty of Engineering research output. Seeing those little nodes, we see things on these maps that might kind of disappear in other measures, I guess, that might just drop off the bottom of a list if you're only looking at the top few of any given thing, the top few authors or the top few topics or the top few publication sources or other things like that that we might be in the habit of looking at. And so I think for the people in the faculty, this visual representation of the connection was fairly impactful for them. Particularly the authorship piece, because a different department within the faculty has since requested a similar author collaboration map to the one that was included here with that affiliation overlay. So obviously it's something that they found interesting, since now they want to see it again, and I will take that as positive feedback for this project. And I'm going to stop my screen sharing at the moment. I guess I can restart if necessary, but I'd like to get back to the more regular Zoom view and be able to see people and addressing questions.
Thank you, Alison, for all of that. And I don't know if other people are in Montreal, probably. It's a huge storm here. So if ever I disconnect again, this time it's that I'll lose power. So hopefully you can keep going. So maybe to finish the wrap up, Justin has 3 very good questions. So I'll go one at a time, or maybe you, Alison, you can see them as well, but I'll read them and for the recording as well. So any gotchas that took more time or caused more problem than you had expected? So
I don't know if this is different from expected, but I will point out that the author affiliation, I don't know if there are any vendors on this call or not, but I will be contacting them, because part of what is tricky about assigning all those affiliations is that the data export is not always so clear on this, right? Authors will often publish with more than one affiliation, even on the same paper. They will include multiple affiliations. And when we pull this data, they will often group authors together and then include the affiliation after that. So there was a little bit more time spent in the data cleaning to get that. And in fact, I was just sending a colleague sort of some steps about how to accomplish that even just yesterday. So if anybody does want more detail or a suggestion on how to handle that. Oh, Claire, perfect. Yes, Clarivate, we will be in touch.
yeah, and I think it depends on the database.
But I don't think that's a surprise. I think everybody has encountered this. Anybody who's working with
and the
Bibliometrics has encountered this.
The output for the affiliation, like matching author affiliation, is not all the same. Sometimes it's author and all their affiliations. Sometimes it's the affiliation and all the authors that belong to that. And so it can be presented differently.
Yes. Well, luckily, I mean, part of the reason we chose the Web of Science export was that it was at least consistent enough that we could that we could clean it up in a way we felt confident about, I guess, without having to do it manually. So yes, for sure.
Okay, second question, how you might change your approach to the projects given the benefit of insights. So what would you change now that it's kind of not done, or maybe you'll improve again?
Well, yeah, no, that is a good question. I think, so this was done in a relatively short time frame. And honestly, I think would have benefited from, I think I already mentioned this, but would have probably benefited from a bit more back and forth with the kind of the sponsors in the faculty. I would love to do a similar project, but more slowly, maybe with more time to consider the different ramifications of the choices we were making, and maybe with taking a little bit more time to try different methods and see what came out, what would come out of them. So I feel pretty comfortable with the way it was done, but I think, yeah, more time for exploration during the project would have been useful.
All right. And before the last question from Justin, you did say you would share your slide.
Oh,
or
yes,
you send them to me, I can send them to the list.
I did. I sent you
that
an
would probably
updated
be, yeah, that would probably be the
PDF.
easiest
So if
version.
you want to
So
send those out, they should
I will
have
do that.
links. Okay.
Perfect. And who or what particular skill set would you might want to bring or include on a similar project in the future? So like,
that's a good question. I'm not sure. I feel like we have it reasonably well covered here. Because like I personally am comfortable with a lot of the different tools involved with the different data sources. I do both some scripted analyses in tools like R, as well as, open refine data cleaning, or just doing stuff in spreadsheets that is more shareable with a wider variety of people. So in terms of those kinds of skills, I feel like we kind of had it covered. But as I mentioned, more collaboration with the project sponsors, I think would have maybe led to some different insights, or at least maybe we would have more information about the insights and the takeaway. That is something that we are trying to improve on. The research impact team at the University of Alberta is being more consistent about requesting feedback from the recipients of our reports on how they ended up being used, and doing more of that follow-up. So, yeah.
thank you. Anyone else? Feel free to raise your hand, open your microphone, or write in the chat.
Pain surprise.
I'm even surprised that there was
Well,
some
no
collaboration.
pain. They were faculty members I've had quite good relationships with, because at the time that I did this project, I was also the liaison to the Faculty of Engineering, and so was working with people I would say I had quite good relationships with in doing this one.
Okay, so maybe people will think of other questions, but the idea of the community of practice is to share as well. Unfortunately, the breakout rooms, we did not set that up, so we can't actually go in breakout rooms. There's not that much time. So I have a few questions for the community. I'll start them one at a time and I'll put them in the chat. So some of you said you've heard of VOSviewer, you've used it as well. And for those who have not, because sometimes we don't hear about those, what prevents you from using these tools, or for whatever reason, why don't you use it? If you want to share, and we can either discuss or find ways around that, if you'd rather. And there was another question that came in at the same time.
And I'm just trying to get the actual numbers here. Of the difference in coverage, because it's related to why we chose Web of Science. So I'm going to just pull up my notes of how many papers were found. Here we go. So yeah, it was fewer. It was fewer than 100 papers difference between our Scopus search results and our Web of Science search results. So we did not feel that we were missing significant coverage by choosing Web of Science over Scopus. So many people I know find Scopus to be more comprehensive. In our case, the difference was small, and the data structure was better for the analysis that we wanted to do, was better to work with. So that's why we chose that. The original paper that I mentioned, Jay McAllister's paper, they used Compendex because they felt that that was the best coverage for their particular engineering faculty. So if you look in the literature, you can see people using a variety of different data sources for similar types of analyses.
Thank you. So no one wants to jump in of why you're not using it. So I'll tell you a little story. So I used VOSviewer maybe 2-3 years ago. And I have to say, I was not scared, but at the beginning, I was like, ooh, this big tool, and oh, it does this. Oh, it's so nice. It's not that difficult to start with it. And I've put the link to some of their documentation earlier in the chat. Maybe I'll put it again, but go look at the documentation. It's quite straightforward. Okay, if you want to do that, click here. And from what I remember, it's like the first step is quite easy, and then after you have to play with it a little bit and go back and forth. But as Alison said, it's also very easy to try something. Oh, it's not what I want. Do something else. And it's, yeah, so I think it's easier than it looks, actually. That's what I want to put out a little bit, that and the link between Web of Science and VOSviewer is very good. At least it was. Maybe the other database have improved, but from my test, it's also possible. Sometimes there's some little tweaking as well. Robert wrote that there's the possibility of using an API as well now. So sometimes you can like use that to get your data.
Yes, I think they have. I think you can, there are several different databases that you can access via API with VOSviewer. So, but we don't necessarily have the, we definitely do not have API access to all of the tools, that, the open tools, I guess, maybe, but not all of the subscription options API wise.
I've never tried it, as I said, so I don't know. I know some of the databases lack the information necessary to make some of the tools. I remember Ludo saying that, so use at your own risk. For people who would like to learn more, actually, CWTS at Leiden does offer a course. I mean, if your department has money to burn, which nobody does, this course was super useful. I mean, Ludo, who's one of the people who built VOSviewer, is one of the lecturers in the course. If you're really rich, you can go take the course in person in the Netherlands.
Oh yeah, so there's another course. Yeah, they're doing one online. I just got the message, I think, this morning as well. And André, so who didn't know that VOSviewer existed, well, now you do, and hopefully you'll try it. And was it mentioned, hopefully, that it's a free tool, you can get it, and maybe if someone has used, I know there's a desktop and an online version. Has anyone used both or compare, or is there an advantage to one? I don't know. I used only the desktop one like 2 years ago. So you can explore that as well. You don't even have to like download, use the web one. I've told it's more limited in what you can do, but maybe they've improved it since then.
So I have a question for participants, if any. So often, this is maybe broader than the VOSviewer conversation, I guess. But if not VOSviewer, are you doing any kind of network analysis in other ways? Or if not, are there other types of analyses that you are doing that you do see as a supplement to some of the maybe what I'll refer to as more traditional bibliometric work? This is, you know, a community of practice for people interested in bibliometrics. So in what way are you currently supplementing some of those numbers?
I see some of my colleagues on the call. I feel I've talked a lot, but if they don't want to talk, so I can talk. We've done we use Gephi actually at the NRC, and it allows for a lot of like you can manipulate a lot of things. You can use, like they have tons of filters, which we use maybe 3 of them because we haven't got into the details. And someone else, so Vandy also used a Gephi. So it's nice. It's very highly customizable, but I think the step to get there is a bit more difficult. Like I've used, so yeah. So I've used, as I said, VOSviewer a while ago. It's basically you Web of Science, Scopus, whatever, like they'll import it and whoop, the map will go out. In Gephi, like the first map you get is really, it's just like a big bunch of black dots. Basically, you don't see anything when you, like your first output, you just don't see anything. So it's kind of, oh, okay, there's more, yeah, more things you have to do to get that nice map, but then you get more stuff that you can play with. Vandy, you have something to add to that?
Yeah, Gephi is quite an experience because the platform requires quite a bit of learning. And the learning that's available, the information that's available about the platform is some is provided by the creator who has another job, by the way, and then some is very much off the cuff. The best information about using Gephi is actually on YouTube. There are a couple of users that are power users that share all of their videos and show some of the hidden tips and tricks of using it. But yes, the first time you run a generation, you're going to see the massive black dots. And you actually have to, the platform has menus on both sides and the top, and you actually have to choose the type of analyses on the right side of the menu, which is, I think, is not intuitive. You have to choose the analyses you would like, and then you have to go to the left and then assign colors and specifics to the nodes and the edges. And so it's going back and forth between the two menus. And if you choose an edge size that doesn't have significant results, then you're going to go back to the other size and adjust your parameters, which may change the whole projection. And you may have to start over. So you'll throw the projection maybe 100 times until you actually get something that you want. Although I do love the ability in Gephi to adjust, especially when you apply labels, if you want to apply name labels, and the ability to adjust those and change your edges. And it's very friendly in that way in the picture you would like to produce. So, and the fact that it's obviously a free tool makes it attractive to graduate students.
And Gephi was made for any kind of map. So VOSviewer, I guess you could do anything you want, but VOSviewer was really developed for bibliographic database. That's why they developed it at the beginning. So Gephi, that's why the link between the data and the tool itself is not as direct as well. So you have to like pre-hash your data, or you have to put it in a certain format that it will understand it, and it's not just directly from the database. So we don't want to scare you, but it's still a great tool, but it's a bit more difficult.
When I was first introduced to Gephi, it was also with Sci2, and I think it was using, or like that no longer exists probably, or is no longer supported, but there were certainly more preparatory steps, I guess, to getting something successful out of Gephi than compared to VOSviewer. And I think you do need to have maybe a deeper understanding of what all the nodes and edges and like all of this information that is in the VOSviewer manual, but that you don't really have to understand to produce something interesting, I guess, in the same way.
All right, well, we're getting close to the end. Any other comments? Anyone has burning questions about network? Because I guess the next step we're starting to explore as well, because all those networks, it's nice to visualize them, it's pretty and so on, but there's like numbers behind those as well, like all the centralities and the degrees and so on, which might mean something, I guess, and it depends on the numbers. So that's like a whole other area of network analysis that can be used as well in bibliometrics, but it's even kind of a step further to understand what these numbers mean. When it's a picture, when it's the visualization itself, it's kind of easy. Oh, yeah, they're linked or they're not linked. It's a big node, it's a small node. Yeah, so questions, comments? And I will share the slide. I will try to do also like the Menti poll from the beginning to present the different results. And I will leave it to Elizabeth for the end.
Yes, thank you, Alison. On behalf of the whole team here at Carl, thank you for a really engaging presentation. Thank you, participants, for being here today, for engaging with this work, and thank you to the Bibliometrics and Research Impact Community of Practice Steering Committee, and especially Christine for moderating the call. Thanks for organizing this event today. I know I've been hearing from some of you already to be added to the listserv, and please go ahead and reach out and we'll get you on the list. Thanks, everybody. Have a great afternoon.